A son of a dead world falls into a galaxy that built its finest achievement on the belief that hope is a strategy. The stars here are older than his grief, and colder than his certainty, and every civilization within them has already negotiated its answer to the question he has never stopped asking. He has never needed to be welcome to help. He has never needed permission to care. But in a universe of prime directives and collective perfection, and gods who wear curiosity like a crown, the question is not whether a man of steel can survive. The question is what a galaxy learns when the only thing it cannot assimilate is the stubbornness of a man who simply will not stop. The orange star called Kareb's candle had been burning for 6 billion years without anyone worth witnessing it. It sat at the edge of contested space between Klingon territory and the unclaimed corridor, too dim to sustain a proper system, too warm to ignore on navigational charts, and too far from the nearest outpost to attract anything except problems. It was exactly the kind of place a Klingon bird of prey captain with philosophical disagreements and no one left to argue with would park her vessel for a standard rotation before heading back to the border patrol she had been running for a decade and a half. Captain Vora, daughter of Kesht, of the House of Morvac, was not hiding. She was thinking. There was a difference. That difference had kept her alive through the Dominion War, through the Dominion's Ketracel white refineries burning on a dozen worlds, through the moment she watched Federation councillors choose peace over victory and felt something like a tooth pulled from her jaw without anesthetic. She had earned her ship in blood. She had filled her war chalice with the names of enemies who had deserved to die. And then the wars had ended, the way Klingon wars always ended. Not in the glorious finality the songs promised, but in diplomatic chambers, where men who had never held a weapon decided what the dying had meant. She sat in her command chair studying the long-range sensor readout and not reading the political report from the High Council that had been waiting 4 days. Then the sensors sang, not an alarm, not a collision warning, a notation, almost polite, an anomaly. A sensor classification that Vorag had never seen in 31 years of active service. Biological contact, extrasolar origin, unclassified. She sat forward. The thing moving through the debris field around Kareb's candle was not in any database she possessed. It was humanoid. It moved under its own power. It was not in a vessel. It was bleeding something that the sensors classified as solar radiation, the kind associated with a G-type yellow main sequence star from every pore of its body, and that radiation was fading, losing intensity with every passing second as the orange star's output soaked into the humanoid cells and offered something measurably, critically less. Vora watched the readout for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, quietly, in the tone her bridge crew had learned to recognize as the most dangerous kind of Klingon calm, "Bring us about." She did not tell them why. She did not have to. 30 years of watching their captain had taught them that when she spoke in that register, the reason was coming, and it was always worth moving first and learning second. The bird of prey changed heading. The amber light of Kareb's candle spread across its hull like old blood. Clark Kent had been airborne for 6 days when the universe ran out. Not in the way a person runs out of patience or money or luck. In the physical, absolute sense. He had been flying at a velocity that would have reduced the distance between Earth and Saturn to a pleasant afternoon, following the gravitational thread that Brainiac's final transmission had left in subspace like a fishhook, and then the hook had pulled, and the universe had folded, and he had passed through something that his Kryptonian physiology had no name for, only a sensation, the sensation of being turned inside out and right side in again, without any of the middle steps. And then there were different stars, wrong color, wrong warmth. He had stopped moving and hung in the void and looked at them for a long time. The yellow sun was gone, not behind a planet, not obscured, gone. The star behind him was orange, and the stars ahead were red and white, and arrangements he had no context for, and the cells in his body, cells that had been drinking sunlight since the day Jonathan Kent pulled him from a burning rocket in a Kansas cornfield, were beginning the slow, silent process of spending what they had stored. He was not invulnerable here. He was borrowing power from a rapidly diminishing account. He had perhaps 48 hours at full capacity. Then things would become complicated. He chose a direction based on the faint heat signatures of technology, the electromagnetic trace of something built, something that meant civilization, and he flew toward it. He did not expect the ship. The ship was not anything that resembled his idea of human engineering. It was compact and angular and predatory, shaped like a bird caught mid-dive, and it dropped from warp at a distance that told him whoever was piloting it had been watching him for some time before deciding to close. He knew a military posture when he saw one. He knew a weapon when he saw one. He stopped moving and raised his hands, open, palms out, and waited. The ship circled him once. Then a voice came through the vacuum, transmitted on a frequency his hearing could catch, speaking in a language he had never encountered, hard-edged and percussive, built from consonants that sounded like weapons being loaded. He listened to 30 seconds of it, and his brain began doing what it always did with new languages, parsing, sorting, building the architecture of meaning from context and repetition. He was not a telepath, he was not a universal translator, but he had spent 3 years learning Kryptonian from a dead man's hologram and 2 years learning Interlac for a Justice League crisis, and language, for Kal-El, was a matter of patience and attention. He gave her 30 more seconds. Then he said, in rough approximation of the language he had just heard, badly accented, probably grammatically impossible, "I mean no harm." Aboard the IKS Juris Eternal, every member of the bridge crew turned to look at their captain. Vora's expression did not change. She did not fire. That was the first surprise she gave him. She spoke back, faster than before, more complex, and he caught perhaps a third of it. Warrior, stranger, boundary, question. He answered in kind, piecing together syllables like a man building a bridge over a river he was currently standing in. She laughed, not warmly. The way you laugh when an animal does something unexpected, and you are genuinely not sure yet whether unexpected is the same as dangerous. She brought the ship closer. He could see her through the forward port then, a stocky, armored figure, backlit by the amber glow of her bridge consoles, staring at him the way he had been stared at before, with the specific intensity of someone trying to categorize something and finding all the categories insufficient. He was used to that look. He had worn it himself, once, looking at a mirror at age 17 in a Kansas barn, wondering what he was. She raised one hand, a gesture he had not yet learned in Klingon but could read perfectly, because the language of bodies is universal in the way formal language never is. She was pointing at him. Then at the ship. The invitation could not have been clearer if she had spoken it in English. He considered the alternatives. He was in unknown space, with no map, no coordinates, no allies, and a diminishing supply of stored solar energy. The ship had weapons. The person inside it had chosen to speak rather than fire. In his experience, every person who chose to speak instead of fire was a person worth talking to. He nodded. She opened an airlock. The inside of the IKS Juris Eternal smelled like iron and burning incense, and something metabolic that his olfactory sense classified as combat readiness hormones at roughly double the human baseline. The crew were Klingon, every one of them, and every one of them studied him with the same expression their captain wore, which was the expression of individuals who had decided not to kill something, but had not yet entirely ruled out the option. He was taller than most of them. He was broader. He was wearing a suit that had survived an interdimensional rift and 6 days of deep space vacuum, and the S-shield on his chest had taken on a coat of space dust that he had not cleaned because there had been no surface to clean it on. Vora met him at the airlock herself. She was perhaps a foot shorter than him and looked like she could lift the front end of a car. She looked at his chest emblem for a long moment. Then she looked at his face. Then she said something in Klingon that he almost caught, and he asked her to repeat it. She repeated it. He caught it this time. "What are you the son of?" He answered honestly. "I am the son of Jor-El, of the planet Krypton." She had never heard either name. That was visible in the brief recalibration behind her eyes, but she filed them away with the precision of a soldier, noting terrain features, and said, "And what do you defend?" "Everyone I can," he said. "As many as I can reach." Vora was quiet for 3 seconds. In Klingon cultural context, 3 seconds of silence from a captain on her own bridge represented the highest form of serious consideration, the kind that precedes either combat or respect, and the gap between the two was always narrower than most species preferred. Then she said, "That is either the most honorable answer I have ever heard, or the most stupid." "It might be both," he said. For the first time in the encounter, something shifted in her expression that was not calculation. She turned and walked deeper into the ship. By the way, she did not look back. He understood he was meant to follow. They fed him. Not generously, not warmly, but practically, a plate of something that his biology would accept, and they sat across from him at a low table in what served as the captain's mess and talked for 3 hours. He learned more language. He told her, in pieces and approximations, who he was, what he was, where he had come from, and how he had arrived. She listened to all of it without the expressions he associated with disbelief, because Klingons had a specific relationship to impossible claims. They evaluated them by the evidence in front of them, rather than by the precedent of what they had previously believed possible. The evidence was a man who had survived 6 days in vacuum without a vessel, who had learned rough Klingon in under 2 hours, and whose cellular physiology her medical officer described, in barely controlled professional excitement, as something he had no classification for, built on a solar energy conversion system of theoretical elegance that he would need weeks to fully document. Vorar believed him. "Your home is gone?" she asked. "For a long time," he said. "And you kept defending," she said. Not a question. A noting of fact, the way a warrior notes the depth of a river before deciding to cross it. "Yes." "Then you understand something about Klingon honor," she said, "even if you do not know the word for it yet." He thought about this. "I think I understand something about grief," he said, "and about choosing what to do with it." She was quiet again, 2 seconds this time, which in Vorag's scale meant something different from 3, meant she was not deciding how to categorize him, but deciding how to respond to something that had landed somewhere real. "Then we will speak more," she said. "But first you should know, a Federation vessel has been monitoring this sector. They will have our communication signal. They will come." He asked what the Federation was. The way Vorar answered told him almost everything he needed to know. She answered with the careful precision of someone describing a rival they respect and disagree with entirely, the way you describe an opponent who fights clean and wrong simultaneously, and what he heard in the space between her words was the shape of an old argument that had never been resolved, and possibly never would be, the argument about whether safety is given or won, and who pays the cost of the difference. "They believe," she said, "that the galaxy can be made safe for everyone. Is that wrong?" he asked. "It is not wrong," she said. "It is naive. Safety is not given. Safety is won, and held, and won again, and the people who do the winning do not always get to enjoy what they secured." She paused. "The Federation enjoys it. My people win it." He sat with that for a moment. "On my world," he said. "That argument ended a lot of wars." "How?" "Usually," he said, "because someone flew through a wall." She considered this with the evaluative gravity of someone taking information she intends to use later, and then the ship's long-range sensors chimed, and she rose, and the conversation about the wall became something they both carried separately into the next hour. The USS Meridian dropped out of warp at a respectful 100,000 kilometers. In Starfleet protocol, that distance was deliberately diplomatic rather than tactical, the signal that they were not here to escalate, but to understand, and Captain Dale Orveth had chosen it with the precision she applied to every variable she could control. She had been briefed on the anomalous biological contact 30 minutes after the Durus Eternal's sensors first picked it up, and she had spent those 30 minutes doing 3 things simultaneously: reading Starfleet's first contact protocols, reviewing everything known about Klingon classification of unidentified biological entities, and doing what she always did in situations the protocols did not quite cover, which was thinking. The sensor data told her: humanoid, extrasolar origin, biology previously unclassified, evidence of energy absorption with no parallel in the Federation database, currently aboard a Klingon bird of prey at the edge of the unclaimed corridor. The sensor data told her what it was not. Not Borg, not Changeling, not Romulan, not Cardassian, not any of the 47 known species in her standing first contact directory. What it was, she could not yet determine, but it was on a Klingon ship. And Klingon ships at the edge of unclaimed territory with unusual guests had a historical tendency to become incidents, and Orveth had prevented 11 incidents in her career and intended this to be the 12th. "Open a channel to the Duras Eternal," she said. "Raise shields to standby. Not full, standby." Her first officer, a young Bolian named Tev, shot her the look that meant he thought standby shields were an insufficient precaution. She returned the look that meant she was the captain. Vora answered with the expression of a woman who had been expecting the call and was not particularly pleased about being correct. "Captain Orveth," she said, in Federation standard, with the precise inflection of someone who has learned a language well enough to wield it. "You are a long way from your nearest starbase." "We monitor the corridor, Captain Vora," Orveth said. "You know that. What interests all of us is the life form you have aboard. My guest is not a Federation concern. Anything at the edge of unclaimed space with an unclassified biology is technically everyone's concern. The protocols are quite clear." "Your protocols are quite clear," Vorak said. "Mine are equally clear. My protocol says he is my guest until he chooses otherwise." Orveth considered this for the right amount of time. "Could I speak with him?" There was a pause. Vora stepped back from the screen. The man appeared. Orveth had read the sensor profile. She had not been prepared for the visual. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and wearing something that was clearly a uniform from a civilization nowhere in her records. A deep blue, weathered by what looked like very hard use, with an insignia on the chest she could not identify, a stylized shield shape in red and yellow that meant nothing in her cultural database, and somehow communicated authority anyway. He looked at her with eyes that were measuring and thoughtful, and entirely without the particular kind of wariness that people usually brought to screens when they were being watched by someone with weapons, and he said, in passable but heavily accented Federation standard, "Hello, Captain. I am Kal-El, of Krypton. I appear to have taken a wrong turn." Orveth blinked. Then, because she was a Starfleet captain and had been trained extensively for the impossible, she composed herself in approximately 1 second and said, "Welcome to this quadrant, Kal-El. I am Captain Dale Orveth of the Federation starship Meridian. I would very much like to understand your situation, if you are willing." "I am willing," he said. "I have a great many questions myself." "Then perhaps," she said carefully, looking from his face to Vorag's, "we could find a neutral meeting point." "He is fine where he is," Vorak said. "I am sure he is," Orveth said pleasantly. "I would simply like the opportunity to speak with him in a setting somewhat more comfortable for interstellar diplomacy than a Klingon bridge." Kal-El looked at Vorak. Something passed between them, not speech, the particular quality of two people who have just spent 3 hours in difficult conversation and arrived at something too new to be called trust, but too close to be called nothing. "There is a planetoid at bearing 7 Mark 12, Vorag said finally. "Class L, breathable." "That works," Orveth said. "You will come alone," Vora said. "I will bring 2 crew. He will make his own choice." "Agreed," Orveth said. The planetoid had no name in any catalogue. It had a thin atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen, grey rock extending to 3 horizons, and a sky the color of a bruise, where the light from Kareb's candle diffused through too much particulate for warmth. They stood on it, the 5 of them, Orveth and her science officer, Vora and her first officer, and Kal-El, who stood slightly apart from both groups the way he always stood, in the center of things, equidistant from conflict. Orveth ran her tricorder over him for 30 seconds, before he gently, but very firmly, covered it with one hand. "I am not ill," he said, "and I am not infectious." "I know," she said. "I am trying to understand what you are. What your readings will tell you," he said, "is that I am running low on something I need badly. The star you call Kareb's candle does not produce the right wavelength. I have perhaps 36 hours of effective capacity remaining at current draw. After that, I become approximately as powerful as a very stubborn human being." "What do you need?" she asked. "A G-type yellow main sequence star. Extended exposure, several hours minimum." Orveth looked at her science officer, who said without looking up from his tricorder, "There is a G-type, approximately 3 days from here at Warp 5. Then we have 36 hours to solve your situation before it becomes significantly more complicated, Orveth said. She turned to Vorah. Would you consider escorting us? I am not a convoy, Vorah said. No, Orveth said, but you are the captain who found him, which means you have an interest in his well-being that I suspect extends beyond the tactical, regardless of what you would like me to believe. Vorah looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Kal-El. Then she said, We will travel in parallel, not under your command, under the same heading. That is entirely acceptable, Orveth said. They were 2 hours into the journey, Meridian at Warp 5 and the Durus Eternal matching heading from a distance, when the long-range sensors began their warning, and Tev came to Orveth's ready room with the expression she recognized as a person who has just discovered something worth being afraid of. Captain, Tev said, contact at bearing 249, long range, moving toward us. She looked at the readout. She had seen that configuration before. Everyone in Starfleet had seen it. You dreamed about it on long patrols through quiet space. The perfect geometric certainty of a cube, massive and absolute and alive with a billion voices that were one voice that was no voice, approaching at a speed that should not have been possible this far from any known transwarp conduit. Borg. Battle stations, she said, quietly. Get me Kal-El. She found him in the observation lounge, standing at the viewport, watching the stars with the particular quality of attention she had in 2 hours already come to recognize as his default mode. Complete, absolute, without the restlessness most people brought to the infinite. He simply watched it, and the watching seemed sufficient. The Borg are coming, she said, without preamble, because preambles in crisis were wasted breath. He looked at her. Tell me what that means, she told him. She told him about the collective, about assimilation, about the hive mind and the drones and the way the Borg did not conquer civilizations so much as digest them, absorbing technology and biology and knowledge and individuality into a single endless hunger that had no cruelty in it, no hatred, only the absolute and merciless logic of optimization. She told him about Wolf 359. She told him about the cube that had nearly destroyed Earth. She told him about every captain in Starfleet who had encountered a Borg vessel and the statistical table of what generally happened next. He listened to all of it. He did not look afraid. They are coming for me, he said. Not a question. The sensor profile suggests the approach vector is targeting your biological signature specifically, she said. Your cellular structure is unlike anything in known biology, and the Borg do not leave things unlike anything in known biology alone. How many people are on that ship? He asked. The cube will carry several thousand drones, she said. Former people, assimilated. Not a crew, he said. Not individuals anymore. Not anymore, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The stars moved past the viewport at warp speed, blurs rather than points of light, the universe in motion. What is the Federation's plan? He asked. Survive, she said, with a directness she usually reserved for her senior staff. We cannot destroy a Borg cube. The best we have ever managed is damage, delay, and occasionally a retreat in which most of the ship survives. And the Klingons? Captain Vorah will fight, she said, without hesitation, without strategy, and probably without surviving it, because that is what Klingons do with things they cannot defeat, and will not run from. He nodded slowly. I will not ask you to fight for me, he said. This is not your crisis. It is now, she said. And even if it weren't, the Borg do not leave witnesses to decline the invitation. She paused. What can you do, honestly, given your current capacity? He thought about it with the precision of someone taking inventory rather than boasting. At current reserves, I can survive a direct hit from your largest weapon, he said. I can move faster than most ships can track. I can project enough energy from my eyes to cut through most physical materials. He paused. I am getting weaker, but I am not weak yet. What stops you? She asked. What is your threshold? Red solar radiation, he said. In sufficient quantity, my cells stop absorbing energy and I become fully baseline humanoid. There is none of that here, but if the Borg understand my biology well enough, they may attempt to synthesize it. He looked at her. I do not know if they understand my biology that well yet. The Borg understand biology very quickly, she said. I assumed, he said. Then we have some time, and not much of it. He straightened, and the movement had a particular quality, a squaring of the shoulders, a settling of the breath, that Orveth had seen before, in soldiers on the edge of something enormous. It was not bravado, it was the simple, absolute process of deciding. Tell me everything you know about a Borg cube, he said. Internal layout, weak points, where the central coordination originates, she told him. Vorag was not pleased about the plan. She expressed her displeasure in Klingon, with the particular velocity that indicated she was less angry than insulted, which was in some ways worse. You cannot send one warrior at a cube and keep the fleet behind, she said on the joint channel. That is not tactics, that is sacrifice with no honor attached to it. The fleet cannot help me inside the cube, Kal-El said, from the Meridian's bridge. The only way to stop a cube this size before it processes everything in this system is to disrupt its coordination from the center. If I can reach the vinculum and destabilize it, the cube loses coherence. You will be assimilated before you reach the center, Vorag said flatly. The Borg assimilate by injecting nanoprobes through physical contact, Orveth said. His skin at current reserve levels is resistant to the mechanical force a drone's tubule operates at. For the next several hours, they cannot inject through intact skin. Several hours, Vorag repeated. It is enough, he said. And if it is not enough, then I will need a pickup, he said, and I will need it fast. We can do fast, Orveth said. I know, he said, and he walked to the airlock. The cube came out of warp at 700,000 kilometers, and for one long second, the universe simply looked at it. 3 kilometers on a side. Matte black, tessellated with the green luminescence of technology that had been absorbing the best of 1,000 civilizations for 4 centuries. It did not slow down. It did not hail. It did not perform the tactical assessment of a warship deciding whether to engage. It simply came, at the speed of absolute certainty, because the Borg had not encountered anything in 4 centuries that required more than certainty to defeat, and the cellular signature of species 0001 was not yet, not quite yet, in the category of things that required reassessment. The Meridian broke to port. The Dura's Eternal broke to starboard. Both ships opened fire. The Meridian's phaser banks cut lines of gold light across the cube's forward face. The Dura's Eternal's disruptors hammered at its lateral surface. The cube's shields absorbed both without visible effect and began scanning for the biological signature it had been sent to collect. It found Kal-El, 200,000 kilometers away, moving toward it, at a velocity that exceeded anything the cube's long-range sensors had recorded for a biological organism in 4 centuries of accumulated data. He was flying, not in a ship, not in a suit, flying, under his own power, through vacuum, trailing the last photonic energy his cells had absorbed from Carib's candle, visible on sensor readouts as a streak of light against the dark. Fast enough that the cube's point defense systems had approximately 4 seconds to track and engage before impact. They fired. The beams were cutting and disruptive, and would have vaporized any organic material in the galaxy. He went through them, not dodging, through. He absorbed what he could and deflected what he couldn't, with the aura of solar energy bleeding from his skin, and he hit the cube's hull at 4 seconds post-fire, and his fist went into Borg, plating the way a fist goes into wet clay, 6 feet of compressed metal folding around his hand, and at the edge of his extraordinary hearing, he caught the first change in the Borg's transmission frequency. They had not expected impact, they had expected capture. He adjusted their expectations with both hands. He tore a hole in the hull large enough for a shuttle and pulled himself inside. The inside of a Borg cube was not, as far as Clark Kent was concerned, hell. He had seen hell, he had been to Apocalypse. Hell was fire and screaming and the deliberate architecture of cruelty. This was something different and in its way worse, a place from which cruelty had been removed because it had never been necessary, a place of complete and organized utility, its darkness lit by green-white bioluminescent panels, its corridors humming with the shared breath of thousands of minds that had become one mind that had become no mind at all. The drones came. They came in the particular way Orveth had described, not running, not rushing, simply walking with the unhurried precision of things that have never needed to hurry because they have always, eventually, won. There were dozens of them, once humanoid shapes retrofitted with Borg implants, their organic components visible through gaps in the technology that had been added to them, and each one of them had been somewhere else, once, before this. He caught the first one by its outstretched arm as the assimilation tubules extended from its wrist. He held it steady, carefully, with the calibrated force of a man who can crack titanium and knows it, and he looked at its face. There was a person in there, not accessible, not recoverable, not with what he had and what he knew, but present, in some biological sense, the hardware running on software that had once been a self. He set it aside, not destroyed, set aside, out of his path. The drones did not respond with anger. They did not respond with fear. They recalculated his trajectory and 6 more came, and he moved through them with the careful precision of a man trying not to break something irreplaceable while navigating a very dangerous room, and then precise became impossible because there were 20 of them and the corridor was narrow and he was losing reserve charge faster than he wanted to, and he let himself go. The heat vision came from his eyes in twin beams that cut the corridor's control systems rather than the drones themselves, severing power conduits, disrupting deck plating until the coordinated advance fractured into something briefly uncoordinated. He flew. The Borg plating came apart ahead of him wherever he needed it to, his fists hitting bulkheads with the patient violence of someone who has a destination and no interest in delay. He had a destination, the vinculum. Every Borg cube had one, Orveth had told him. A processing node at the geometric center, the relay point for the local network connecting individual drones to each other and to the collective. Disrupt the vinculum and the cube loses coherence. The drones would not stop, but they would lose the synchronized coordination that made them lethal at scale, and the cube itself would lose the ability to function as a unified weapons platform. He flew toward the center. The cube adjusted to him. He felt it before he saw it, a shift in the frequency of the hive signal, a modulation his hearing detected as a change in the electromagnetic field around him, and then the drone responses changed. They stopped coming at him individually. They began coming in groups, precisely timed, from multiple vectors simultaneously, synchronized with the cold intelligence of something that had learned and was applying the learning in real time, and the temperature dropped. The Borg were venting something into the sections ahead of him. His biology registered it as he passed through. Radiation. Not red solar, not what he feared most, but ionizing radiation at a frequency his cells could not convert, could not use, that simply passed through his stored reserves like water through a drain, pulling capacity he needed. They were solving him. In real time, using information from their probes and sensors, and the simple fact of his continued presence in their ship, they were constructing a model of his biology and finding its edges. He flew faster. The vinculum chamber was vast and green, and silent in the specific silence of a machine that does not breathe. It occupied the physical center of the cube, a space perhaps 30 meters across, and the vinculum itself was a hexagonal structure of Borg technology, pulsing with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that belonged to no single heart, the aggregated beat of the collective's local processing node. Standing in front of it, 6 drones that were different. Not different in obvious ways, still drones, still implanted. But these 6 had a quality of directed attention that Orveth's briefing had mentioned without fully conveying. A Queen's adjutants, networked more directly to the core than standard drones, capable of independent processing at a level approaching individual thought. And they could speak, Kal-El of Krypton, one of them said, in Federation standard, with the cadence of a voice that is technically individual and structurally not. We have processed 6,000 years of Kryptonian xenobiological theory from records encoded in your cellular memory during our scans. We understand what you are. He stopped. He was breathing hard, not from effort, from the radiation drain. He could feel it, the way a battery feels when low, a quality of potential that was no longer bottomless. You understand what I am, he said. Do you understand what I am here for? You intend to damage the vinculum, the adjutant said. You believe this will disrupt our coordination and allow your allies to engage us more effectively. Yes, he said. This is accurate, the adjutant said. We have a counter-proposal. He waited. You are species 0001, the adjutant said. Not a designation we assign casually. In 4 centuries of encounters, we have not found a biological configuration that represented a net upgrade to the collective of the magnitude your cellular structure implies. Your solar conversion matrix, if integrated, would allow every drone in the collective to maintain cellular activity in environments currently lethal to assimilated organisms. You would add to the perfection. No, he said. You would save more lives as part of the collective than you ever could individually, the adjutant said. The mathematics are not arguable. The collective acts with perfect coordination. Individual effort is inefficient. You know this. You have felt it, the weight of being one person, one will, insufficient to stop all the things you cannot reach in time. With us, you could reach everything. The argument landed somewhere close to a wound. He had felt exactly that. He had felt it over a city on fire while a child cried somewhere he could not be. He had felt it over a war that ended while he was dealing with the crisis that had begun while he was dealing with the last one. The weight of being one. No, he said again, quieter. Why not? The adjutant said. Because the person I would become, he said, would not be able to answer that question, and the question is the only thing that makes the answer matter. He moved. The heat vision hit the vinculum from 40 feet. Not the precision beams he had used in the corridor, but the full concentrated output of cells burning through their last reserves, with the clear understanding that afterward, he would be baseline humanoid in every way that mattered, and the vinculum had to go down before that happened. The beams hit the hexagonal node at a frequency the Borg had not previously encountered. Because his frequency was not from this universe, it was Kryptonian solar output routed through a body that had been storing it for 30 years, and it burned. The vinculum cracked. The adjutants came. He caught the first 3 with his hands, held them at arm's length, poured heat vision across the second wave, and then the vinculum's steady hum changed from a pulse to a fractured stutter, and the synchronized quality of the drones across the entire cube broke like a mirror dropped on stone. He could hear it change. The collective's local signal, that constant frequency he had been tracking since he breached the hull, went from orchestral to cacophonic, 1,000 voices that had been speaking in unison, suddenly trying to remember how to speak separately, each one pulling toward individual processing it had not used in years, decades, centuries. The cube shook. He was running out of charge. He could feel it, not gradually but acutely, the difference between a full reserve and an empty one arriving faster than he had expected because the radiation drain had been working longer than he realized. He had perhaps minutes of enhanced capacity remaining. He used them. He flew back the way he had come, through the corridor he had carved, through the breach in the hull, and he was in vacuum again, cold and absolute and airless, and he could feel his body's Kryptonian protocols beginning the process of shutting down the systems that required yellow sun support, which meant he was becoming, incrementally, and then all at once, the thing he had always been underneath the cape, which was a man. A tired man, floating in space, 30 seconds from losing consciousness. Meridian, he said, on the emergency frequency Orveth had given him, and was surprised by how steady his voice remained. I think I would like that pickup now. He woke in sickbay. The lights were softer than on the Klingon ship. The ceiling was more curved. Everything smelled like recycled air and antiseptic rather than iron and incense. A woman stood at the foot of the bed with gray hair and the expression of someone who has just completed a very complicated puzzle and is permitting herself exactly 7 seconds of satisfaction before moving to the next. Chief Medical Officer Inara Voss, she said, when she saw his eyes open. You are aboard the Meridian. You have been unconscious for 9 hours. Your cellular reserves are currently at what I am calling, in the absence of a better technical term, baseline, which means that at the moment you are strong, fast, and resilient at a level that would make you remarkable in a prize fight and completely out of your depth in the kinds of situations we appear to be navigating together. How is the cube? He asked. Retreating, she said. Damaged. The vinculum disruption lasted long enough for the Meridian and the Duras Eternal to do significant damage to its weapons systems, and then the collective apparently recalculated the tactical value of remaining in this engagement and withdrew. She paused. A Borg cube in retreat is not something most Starfleet officers see in a career. You have now managed it without a starship or a crew. How long until we reach the yellow star? 22 hours at current warp, she said. In the meantime, I am obligated to tell you that you are my most interesting patient in 31 years of medicine, and I intend to learn everything your biology is willing to teach me, with your permission. Permission granted, he said, within reason. Reason is a flexible category, she said. Rest. He did not rest. He lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about what the adjutant had said, about the mathematics of scale, about the weight of one, and he thought about what he had said in response, and he thought about whether it was true. He thought it was true. But he could feel the part of him that was not entirely sure, the part that had been doing this since he was 22 and would keep doing this until he could not, and that part was tired in the way that only people who will never stop are ever tired, a tiredness that does not accumulate in the body but somewhere else, somewhere that rest does not reach. He got up and found his suit folded on a chair and put it on and went to find Captain Orveth. She was in her ready room with the same cup of tea she seemed to carry from crisis to crisis, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway without looking surprised. Sit down, she said. I was expecting you. He sat. The Borg transmitted a signal, she said, to Starfleet Command, through subspace. I have a contact at Command who has told me its content. She looked at him. They have designated you a collective priority. That designation does not change. Wherever you are in this universe, they will know. I know, he said. Then you understand that your presence here is, in the most straightforward possible terms, a permanent complication. I understand that, he said. I would like to ask you something. Ask. Is there a way home? She was quiet for a long time. She looked at her tea. She looked at her desk. She looked at the stars through the small window behind her, stationary ones, hanging in the dark like fixed points that did not know how far they were from where they needed to be. We have theoretical frameworks for dimensional transit, she said carefully. We have encountered phenomena adjacent to what you described. Quantum fissures, interphasic rifts. Our science teams have occasionally been able to replicate controlled events of this nature. She paused. Finding the specific frequency that leads to your specific universe from inside this one is considerably more complex than what we typically solve. But not impossible, he said. I have not had good experiences saying things are impossible, she said. It tends to make the universe argumentative. He almost smiled. I cannot simply accept help and offer nothing in return, he said. It is not how I work. I had noticed, she said. What does the Federation need? He asked. What is it trying to do that it cannot currently do? Where are the places where more is needed than exists? Orveth looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a significant number of assumptions at once. You are offering to help, she said. Until I find a way home, he said. And then I will go, because there are people there who need what I can give, in the same way these people need their own defenders. But until then, yes, I am offering to help. Do you know how many crises there are in this galaxy on any given day? She said. I am getting an idea, he said. You cannot solve all of them, she said, and her voice was not unkind. I know, he said. I have never been able to solve all of them. I try for the ones in front of me. She was quiet again. The tea steamed, the stars held still. There is a planet, she said, in the Cardassian demilitarized zone, a colony of 1,500 people, mostly civilians, under a Cardassian resource extraction operation that violates 3 separate treaty clauses and is genuinely in danger of collapse. We have been trying to address it diplomatically for 8 months. The Cardassians are not responsive to diplomacy on this particular topic. Show me the coordinates, he said. We should wait until you have reached the yellow star, she said. Show me the coordinates, he said, for when we have reached the yellow star. She showed him the coordinates. They reached the star 2 days later. It was G-type, main sequence, unremarkable in every astronomical measurement, and it was the most beautiful thing Kal-El had seen in 9 days. He went out to meet it the way he had always gone to greet the sun, quietly and alone, and he hung in the photosphere's outer edge and let the yellow light do what yellow light does, which is pour into a Kryptonian's cells like water into dry earth, slow, and then faster, and then all at once, the reserves returning, the perception sharpening, the senses extending their reach, and he felt himself becoming the thing he was, the thing he had chosen to be, and the thing he had been chosen to be, and the thing he simply was, at a level below choice, and it was both terrifying and necessary and good. He stayed for 3 hours. When he flew back to the Meridian, the ship's external sensors registered a power output from his body that made Tev look very carefully at the readings, and then very carefully at the captain and say, without quite finding the appropriate words, "Captain, I think he may be significantly more powerful than we appreciated." "I suspect," Orveth said, that is probably true of most things he does." He was preparing to board the shuttle for the Cardassian demilitarized zone when Vorar appeared at the end of the docking bay corridor. The Klingon captain walked toward him with the deliberate quality of a person who has made a decision they have been resisting for some time and has finally arrived at it. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at him. "I am accompanying you," she said. "This is not your mission," he said. "My mission is what I decide it is," she said. "I have 31 years of service, and a ship that answers to me, and a crew who will follow me into whatever I decide to walk into." She paused. "And I have been watching you since I found you drifting in my sector, with your powers dimming, and I have decided that what you are doing is worth watching, and possibly worth helping." He looked at her for a long moment. "I cannot guarantee your safety," he said. "I have never wanted anyone to guarantee my safety," she said. "That is the whole point." He nodded, once. The way you nod to someone whose answer has closed an argument completely. "Then let's go." The demilitarized zone on the edge of Cardassian space found itself witnessing something it had not predicted. A Klingon bird of prey, and a man in a red cape arriving above a colony of 1,500 people who had not been told help was coming. Below them, a Cardassian extraction operation ran on the assumption that no one would care enough to intervene. Gul Verak, a careful officer with 19 years of service and a reputation for reading political situations with precision, looked at his sensor readouts and said, with genuine confusion, "What is that?" His tactical officer said, "Unknown biological entity, sir, emerging from the Klingon ship." "Tell the Klingon ship to stand down," Verak said. The Klingon ship did not stand down. The unknown biological entity flew through Verak's shields the way air flows through a window screen, gently and completely, and appeared above his ship hanging in space at close range, and looked at his command bridge through the viewport with eyes that Verak's security officer later described, in his official report, as burning gold. The gold eyes fired 2 precisely targeted beams of heat ray energy, calibrated with the specificity of a man who had been doing this for 20 years and knew exactly how much force a weapons array requires to stop working without killing the people inside it. The beams hit Verak's weapon systems at the exact coupling points Orveth's database had marked as critical, and the weapons went down, and the communications array went down 3 seconds later from a follow-up strike so precise it had targeted a relay no larger than a human wrist. The extraction operation stopped. "This," Verak said, in the tone of a man reassessing his entire morning, "is a diplomatic incident." "The incident," a voice said, on the one channel he had left, "was the 8 months your government spent refusing to comply with 3 treaty clauses, while 1,500 people ran low on food and medicine." The voice was warm, not angry, not righteous in the way that demands performance, simply factual, in the way facts are delivered by people who have had to wait longer than they should have to say them. You can file whatever reports you need to file. But the extraction is over, and I would suggest you tell your government that the demilitarized zone will need to be checked more carefully from now on, because I intend to check it. Verak's tactical officer said, very quietly, "Is that a threat?" Verak said, equally quietly, "I believe it is a promise." He did not need to destroy anything else that day. The colony received its food shipments. The medical supplies held in Cardassian inspection quarantine for 3 months were released. The extraction equipment was disabled but not damaged beyond repair, because he had not been angry enough to be destructive, only precise enough to be effective, and he knew the difference better than almost anyone, had spent 20 years learning where the line fell between what a problem required and what his frustration wanted. When he landed among the colonists, they stared at him the way people stare at things they have no category for. They knew about Klingons, they knew about Cardassians, they knew about Starfleet, they did not know about him. A child of perhaps 6, with the round open face of someone who has not yet learned to pretend, looked at the symbol on his chest and said, "What does that mean?" He crouched down to her level. "It is from my home," he said. "It means hope." She considered this with the seriousness that 6-year-olds apply to things that matter. "Did you bring us hope?" she asked. "I brought what I could carry," he said. "The rest you keep yourselves." She seemed to accept this. She pointed at his cape. "Why is it red?" He looked at the cape, which was battered and space-stained, and had been through a Borg cube, and an interdimensional transit, and 6 days of vacuum, and several more days of everything else. It was still red. "I am honestly not sure," he said, "but I am glad it is." Behind all of it, in a space that was not quite space, watching from a vantage point that was not quite a location, the being called Q sat in a chair that existed because he had decided it should, and crossed his legs and looked at the scene below with the expression of a being who had been alive for longer than most civilizations and had just seen something he had not expected. He had been watching since the moment Kal-El came through the dimensional membrane. He had been watching because he watched everything that interested him, and this interested him enormously. Q had spent considerable time observing humanity in all its forms, and had developed certain opinions about what humanity could be at its most elevated. This person, this impossible solar-powered son of a dead world, was something he had not seen before. Not the powers. Powers were unremarkable. Q had seen things that could move stars. The person. The specific quality of this particular person, who had been pulled from his universe without warning, lost his power source, been confronted by a Borg cube, been offered the mathematics of true collective efficiency as a genuine alternative to lonely individual effort, and had said no, not from stupidity, not from ignorance, but from a precise and considered understanding of why the alternative was not the answer. Q looked at Kal-El, crouching in a colony square, while a child asked about his cape, and smiled, slowly, the way you smile when you have been wrong about something and are wealthy enough in certainty that you can afford to admit it. He snapped his fingers and was elsewhere, but before he left something behind. A small modification to the local subspace frequency, targeted at the Meridian's navigation array, something that Orvith's science team would find in 3 days and spend 2 weeks decoding, and when they decoded it, they would find a set of coordinates that should not exist, coordinates pointing to a region of space that bore a particular resemblance, in its quantum membrane signature, to the universe Kal-El had come from. Q never did things directly, but he was not, on reflection, cruel. Orvith found him on the observation deck 3 days later, after her science team had found the coordinates. She sat beside him rather than across from him, a choice of position that said something about what the last week had changed. "We found something in the navigation array," she said. "Anomalous data, no clear origin. Our best theory is external introduction, which in this quadrant generally means one source." "Q," he said. "You know about Q." "Vorak told me," he said. "She has opinions about him." "Vorar has opinions about most things," Orvith said. "The coordinates point to a region where our quantum mapping suggests a membrane intersection, a place where the dimensional boundary between universes is thin enough that a focused energy pulse of sufficient magnitude might create a traversable passage." She paused. "It might be home. It might be home," he said. "I can have us there in 5 days," she said. He looked at the stars. He thought about a child asking about a red cape. He thought about Vorag's ship running parallel to the Meridian, which was the closest a Klingon captain would come to saying she had decided they were on the same side. He thought about 1,500 people in a colony who had food now. He thought about 9 items on a list of 12. 5 days, he said. Is there anything else on the way? She looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled out a pad and handed it to him. It had a list on it, 14 items, 12 of them places where someone needed something that the Federation could not provide quickly enough, and the Klingons considered beneath their attention, and the colonists and refugees and border communities of a vast and complicated galaxy were waiting for someone to simply show up. He read through the list. He handed it back. Let's start with the first one, he said. They arrived at the membrane intersection on the 12th day. It looked like nothing, a region of space approximately 2 kilometers across that Orveth's science team could map only in the quantum layer, invisible to the eye, a place where the distance between this universe and the next was smaller than anywhere within range. The Meridian and the Duras Eternal held position at distance, and Kal-El flew to the center of it alone. He hung there and thought about what he was about to do. He thought about Metropolis and the Daily Planet, and the people he had not told where he was going because he had not known he was going anywhere. He thought about the Justice League and the crisis he had been investigating when Brainiac's transmission had pulled him through. He thought about the specific weight of being needed, the weight of having somewhere you were supposed to be. He also thought about this, Orveth on a grey planetoid, saying survive with the directness of someone who had been surviving long enough to be honest about it, Vora laughing at an answer she had not expected to respect and then respecting it anyway. A child's question about a red cape, asked with the pure, clean curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of the answer. A universe that had its own heroes, its own Starfleet, its own ongoing argument about how to be better, that had added one more variable to the argument for 12 days and come out, he thought, not worse for it. He turned to face the Meridian. He could see the observation deck from here if he extended his vision, and he could see Orveth standing there, watching. He could see Vorag's ship running parallel, as it had been running parallel since the beginning. He raised one hand, not a wave, a salute. He poured every reserve of solar energy into a single focused burst, aimed at the precise coordinates Orveth's science team had identified as the membrane's most permeable point, and the energy hit the boundary between universes, and the boundary gave. The light was enormous. And then he was through. Captain Dale Orveth stood on the observation deck of the Meridian and watched the light close behind him, sealing itself the way a wound seals, leaving nothing behind but an ordinary region of space that no longer held anything extraordinary. She stood there for a long time. Tev came to stand beside her and said nothing, because he had learned in 3 years of serving under her that there were moments when the correct contribution was presence. She thought about 12 days. A Borg cube, damaged. A Cardassian extraction operation, ended. 12 checkpoints on a pad, 9 addressed, 3 pointed towards systems that would follow through on their own because the initial push had been enough. A series of encounters between a man from somewhere else and a galaxy that did not know what to do with him, resolved not by force or politics or treaty, but by the simple, relentless practice of showing up and doing what needed doing. She thought about what that meant, not as a tactical lesson, not as a diplomatic precedent, as a thing that had happened and left a mark on her in the way that certain encounters leave marks. The mark of having met something that made you look at what you were doing and ask whether you were doing enough. Captain, Tev said, finally, your orders. She turned from the viewport. Set course for Starbase 74, she said, and find me the next 12 items on that list. He looked at her. The list that Kal-El read. The list that needed to exist before he arrived, she said, and that I am going to start working through now that he reminded me it was there. Tev went to execute the order. Orveth stayed at the viewport one moment longer, looking at the unremarkable stars where something remarkable had been, and she thought about a son of a dead world who had spent 12 days in a universe that was not his own, and had, somehow, without grand declarations or mythic proclamations, simply done more good than most people manage in a lifetime. She thought about hope, about what it means in a galaxy this old, this vast, this full of trouble. She thought that perhaps it did not need a cape to be real, but she was willing to admit it did not hurt. In the halls of the Q Continuum, Where time is a subject of mild amusement and space is a matter of opinion, the being called Q sat with the others of his kind and declined to explain what he had done with the navigation array of one Federation starship, because Q did not explain himself and never had. But later, in a pocket of silence, he arranged for himself in the way only beings of infinite capability can arrange silence. He did something he very rarely did. He thought about what he had learned. The Borg had offered species 0001 the mathematics of the collective. The mathematics had been correct. The calculus of individual effort versus distributed perfection was not, in any rigorous sense, an argument that individual effort wins. The collective was right. You could do more, reach more, save more, from inside a hive of perfect coordination than you could ever do alone, and yet, the man had said, the question is the only thing that makes the answer matter. Q turned that sentence over in his mind with the patience he reserved for genuinely interesting problems. The question being, in his analysis, why? Why defend? Why help? Why choose, repeatedly and without guarantee of success, to go toward trouble rather than away from it? The collective had no answer for this. The collective had no question for this. The collective had transcended the question by transcending the questioner, and Q understood, for the first time in what was approximately 400,000 years, that transcending the question was not the same as answering it. He added Kal-El's name to the very short list of beings in the universe who had managed to surprise him. The list had not had a new entry in 41 years. In the cold mathematics of an infinite universe running on the logic of power and scale and perfect adaptation, a man had declined to be perfected. He had insisted on being himself. He had done so not from ignorance of the alternative, but from a precise and considered understanding of why the alternative cost exactly the thing that made the effort worth making. And he had flown home, and the galaxy was, in ways that would take centuries to fully articulate, different for having held him briefly and let him go.